Hello everyone, this is Professor Joseph Holbrook, and tonight I'm going to talk in our fourth in a series about social theory for religious studies. Today we have something interesting. I'm going to talk about a review essay. These are some of my favorite articles to read. You can go into JSTOR through the library and download a dozen of them on any topic of your choice. Review essays. One of the things we're going to talk about in this course is political culture, and I'll get into more of that next week, talking about what the idea of political culture means. And but this particular article touches on political culture, and it also uses some Weberian theory to analyze 4 books on religion. So without further ado, I'm going to go to the notes, screen share. So this is an article by David Laitin, published in World Politics in 1978, and the title of the article is Religion, Political Culture in the Weberian Tradition. And again, this is a review essay, and the way you know that is as you roll down here, you find that there are four different books that he's reviewing. He's reviewing Donald Eugene Smith, Religion and Political Development; Maxime Rodinson, Islam and Capitalism; John Padden, Religion and Political Culture in Kano; and Clifford Geertz, Islam Observed. Clifford Geertz is a classic anthropologist that we'll talk about later. And of the 4 reviews, that's my favorite that he does. So he talks about the concept of political culture in the 1950s and gives a little bit of background on this idea of political culture with some of the classic writers that it is derived from is Montesquieu and Alexis de Tocqueville, but more recent social scientists would be Almond, Verba and Pye. For the sake of time, I'm not going to look up their first names. I've read some of their books. And then he applies some of Max Weber's theoretical framework to analyze these 4 books and their approach to political cultures. So he differentiates 3 different levels in Max Weber's framework of theoretical analysis. And I didn't realize how important these were until I actually read this review essay. By the way, a review essay can save you a lot of time in building your bibliography when you're doing research. For instance, if you're doing research on a religious study of Islam, this review essay could give you 4 sources that you could put into your bibliography, plus an analysis of them. And in this course, you're going to be doing a lit review, and although a lit review doesn't have to go into the depth that the review essay does, it gives you an idea of what should be involved in a lit review, and it could build up your lit review with sources. So always look for those review essays. They can help you build out your bibliography. So 3 different levels of analysis: the doctrine of the charismatic founder, the practical religion, and the practical religion of the converted. What are these? So he shows that at least 3 out of the 4 of these writers in these books, they err in their analysis by using the first level of analysis, the doctrine of the charismatic founder. So they go back to the Quran and to Muhammad's original writings, and they compare these societies based on the original doctrine of the charismatic founder, which would be Muhammad. And this is a problem because almost no religion stays closely to the original doctrine of its charismatic founder. Every religion pretty much is influenced by the culture in which it grows up in. And then, as he says, even more so, it's emphasized when it becomes encapsulated in a culture of a different culture of converted people who have come to the faith. So, for example, the Christianity, the doctrine of the charismatic founder would be found in the Gospels of Jesus, perhaps the Sermon on the Mount. But then if you were to take that and use that to analyze Christianity in the medieval period in Europe, you're going to get some distortions. Instead, what he's saying here is you need to actually understand medieval Christianity in Europe and analyze it on its own terms, whether or not it conforms to the original doctrine of the founder. And then if you were to take a further step and analyze contemporary Christianity in the United States, that's the religion of the converted. So if you try to analyze contemporary Christianity in the United States strictly using the Sermon on the Mount, obviously contemporary Christianity in the United States is strayed far, far away from the Sermon on the Mount. And so you would have to study the practical, everyday practice, the actual lived practice of Christians in the 21st century in the United States, as opposed to sticking too closely to the original teachings of Jesus, unless you're doing a theological study. So using this framework, the article reviews 4 recent studies on the relationship between religion and society in order to find a more useful way of studying the impact of religion, a cultural institution, upon politics. Weber asserted that certain groups or classes or cultures will be attracted to different doctrines. Peasants, for example, were probably attracted to religious doctrines imbued with magic. They have little scientific control over the source of their livelihood. Feudal political structures probably favored celestial gods because of the regularity and the authority of the stars. The charismatic prophet usually emerged to give some systematic portrayal of ideas to a culture. The original message of the charismatic prophet was less important than the practical or sociological religion that resulted from the routinization of prophetic charisma. In Christianity, for example, even early Christianity before Constantine was very different than what the teachings of Jesus, because by the time it passed from Jesus to Paul and into Greek and Roman culture, it had gone through major transformations. Certain assumptions that Weber makes. First, he makes assumptions about the original charismatic message, that it has little or no sociological importance. The religious ethic that develops over time has little to do with the original theological doctrine. Weber was not interested so much in the psychological effect of the people, of what the people believed. The same is true with Islam. Many people feel like early Islam was much more egalitarian in terms of the roles of women, but within a generation it had become captured by the Middle Eastern Semitic religious structure, cultural structures, which changed the role of women fairly drastically. Weber's idea of capitalism was the rationalization of economics, but also included the idea of calling and a morality of limits as well. Characteristics of modern capitalism, according to Weber, was routine bookkeeping, a clear separation of business from the household, and a clear distinction between the work of the employer and the employed. The idea of a calling went beyond rationalization. In English, calling is the idea of a life task or work performed as if it were an absolute end unto itself. The distinction between the medieval craftsman finding joy in his creation versus the capitalist worker standing on the assembly line with the joyless task of meaning. So The craftsman has a calling. The assembly worker does not so much. He has a job. The idea of calling allows each worker to find an ultimate sense of meaning. So the spirit of capitalism then gives psychic consolation to those who in the Marxist view were exploited. The morality of limits is another important aspect of this. A third characteristic of the spirit of capitalism is the idea of the morality of limits. The irony here is that non-rational economic behavior can be used to explain the rationalization of the economy in Weber's work. He shows that the spirit of capitalism does not involve the pursuit of money for casual pleasures. Frugality and honesty were also a feature of the spirit of capitalism. This distinguishes it from pariah capitalism, or one might say contemporary predatory or monopoly capitalism, where the rich get richer and they spend it on islands and luxury yachts. So Calvinist doctrine, in the Calvinist view, the world exists to glorify God. Any Christian who works to make the world more orderly is working to glorify God. The absence of the confessional in Calvinism means that every person stands alone before God in spiritual isolation. It also it develops into a kind of rugged individualism. A Catholic could go to confession and unburden his soul and receive absolution for his sins. A Calvinist could not do that, nor could they find an assurance of salvation like modern evangelicals. The Calvinists were either predetermined or predestined to be part of the elect, or predestined to be part of the damned, and that nothing they could do had any influence over that toss of the dice. That's probably the wrong way to put it for my theologian friends, but I'll use it anyway. So Calvinism holds out salvation for those who have engaged in a life of systematic good work, but it offers no assurance. In other words, you couldn't know that you were saved, but if your life was blessed and you prospered and you worked hard and you saved money and you lived a moral, upright life and you were frugal and honest, the chances are pretty good that you might be part of the elect. That's the best you could hope for. So Weber thought that each Calvinist must experience anxiety at the thought of damnation. And one way that they could assuage that anxiety is by working hard. Also, Protestants could trust each other in business dealings and induce ever greater savings because they worked hard, accumulated wealth, and they didn't spend it. They lived frugally. So Weber's great idea was to develop this idea of the practical religion. The usual approach to this analysis of religion is to focus on doctrine. Jesus' doctrine was recorded to suit the politics of Pauline propagation. Not again. This dog always comes out here when I'm out here. Shut up! One might call this new sociological fact the practical religion of the converted. It is constantly being influenced by contemporary social conditions. Cultural variables may change more slowly than attitudinal variables, but culture is dynamic, not a static system. So 3 independent sources of influence. One is the pure doctrine of the original religion as analyzed by theologians. The second is the practical religion, or the religion in its sociological context. How does it work out in real life in a particular place and time? The third is the interaction of the practical religion with the cultural conditions of the community of converts. And with that, I'm going to have to close. I'm out of my 15 minutes, but I hope you'll read Laitin's analysis of these 4 books, and you'll get an idea of how to use Weberian theory to analyze a particular work's theoretical approach. Particularly, read the one on Clifford Geertz. He was a very significant anthropologist, and it's good to know about him. And by reading this essay, you can save yourself from reading 4 books, an hour instead of a month, a whole summer.